We've seen photos and videos of UFOs. But now we may even have more tangible evidence that they're here.
This thing you hear all the time, that there is no evidence. There's tons of evidence.
So there's a wave of UFOs over Pennsylvania and a strange residue reported coming down from one of the craft.
It started opening up into a V and just dropped this metallic stuff.
In Poland, there was a UFO sighting, and supposedly some weird glowing rocks were left behind.
The object is an aluminum alloy of unknown origin.
And a metallic object reportedly ejected from a UFO.
So am I seeing the soil itself begin to glow now? Could this trace evidence be proof that aliens are now monitoring planet Earth?
This is something that I've been looking for all my life. This is definitely extraterrestrial.
This is case number 85004, UFO Relics.
One of the most intriguing aspects of ufology, tantalizing, is the aspect of trace evidence. Trace evidence which forms the basis for most modern police investigations, for forensic lab work. Entire cases are broken on what trace evidence there is. We're going to apply that to ufology and to UFO cases.
In most of the cases that we've investigated, most of the evidence has been photos, videos, and like eyewitness testimony. It's actually very rare to have something that you can analyze. Maybe we can get an understanding of what we're actually dealing with, what the UFO phenomenon is.
Before I get too excited, I just want some confirmation here. Do we actually have something physical from somebody to analyze, or is this something somebody saw or an object that somebody heard about?
We are actually on our way to meet a resident in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, who saw an object drop some kind of a flake-type residue, snowflake-type residue on a tree, and this was analyzed, and we are going to talk about the results of that chemical analysis of that material and see that analysis firsthand.
So if we complete an analysis on an object and the conclusion is that this object is extraterrestrial and it's manufactured, that to me stands a test of science. That is the proof that I've been looking for this whole time.
We're heading out to Bucks County, Pennsylvania, where in 2008, the people in this area experienced a large surge in UFO sightings. Although many witnesses have seen these unidentified craft in the skies over the last year, we hear that in one case, the UFO actually left some clues behind that may prove something anomalous occurred. In ufology, we call this trace evidence. And although it's very rare, it could be the smoking gun evidence that we need to solve this huge mystery.
I've saw 3 different sightings of this craft.
It was probably about 30 or 40 feet wide. It almost looked like you took a magnifying glass and put it over the sky and kind of moved it along.
It was dead silent. You couldn't hear anything. It was there and then it disappeared right before my eyes.
Eyewitness testimony about UFOs seen in Pennsylvania is eerily similar. But one witness we set out to meet in Bucks County offers a story a bit more intriguing. The UFO left trace evidence behind, a clue to the UFO's origin.
I saw 4 craft in Bucks County. One of them spilled sparkle stuff down into my trees. My dog woke me up and he was growling. So when I came out, I just saw this bright light, in the sky. I looked up and this big metallic silver object was there.
So about how large would you say this object was?
Probably like 4 of those tall trees. When it went onto its side, you could get a good view of the shape of it. It almost looked like it had a bumper that was shaped into a boomerang, and the rest was just circular. It started opening up into a V and just dropped this beautiful metallic stuff into this tree and that tree. It looked like sparkles, like diamonds, and it was just flickering, and it never stopped flickering. It was in the tree for about 20 minutes. I just was frozen. I just couldn't take my eyes off it, and I didn't want to go in the house to try to get a photograph because I was afraid of missing something. And I'm glad that I chose that, because all of a sudden it just sucked back up like it was a vacuum, and it went right back up into a V shape again.
Did you sense that it was a solid material?
It looked like flakes or glitter that you would buy for a party and sprinkle around.
Was it there the next morning?
No, I didn't see anything after that, no.
If this craft ejected or sprayed something onto Denise's tree, you would think that it would leave some physical evidence behind. So that's what we're looking for.
So eventually you contacted MUFON with
Right.
this. And what exactly did they do when they showed up?
They took pictures, took my story, and they were taking samples of my tree, and...
Did they find anything?
Yeah, they said they did.
Now, our next step in this investigation is to talk to our friends from Pennsylvania MUFON, John Vetri and Bob Gardner, and see exactly what they found and get their analysis of that material. Can you tell me what you guys did when you got the call, how you investigated this case?
We have very specific procedures on how to collect evidence in the chain of custody. We stick to that chain of custody very tightly.
So you're treating each case like a crime scene?
Exactly.
So how long did it take after Denise's report before you guys came down to take the samples?
Took a sample maybe about like a week after it came down.
An entire week elapsed before Bob was able to get to the scene and search for trace evidence. And this might not sound like a long time, but when searching for clues at a crime scene, like these guys treat every one of their cases, it's an eternity. But any evidence that could possibly have been left there could be contaminated or gone altogether. But hopefully they got lucky.
There were 2 trees that were actually affected. This privet tree here, and then the maple tree back there. I took samples from the affected trees, took soil samples from the affected area, and then I walked down about 100 yards, there's another maple tree on there. So I took a sample from there, and then the closest thing I could find to this privet was around the corner. So I took a sample of that along with the soil, bagged it up, and then sent it out to labs to be tested.
What about equipment? Do you guys have any special equipment, detectors, that sort of thing?
I have a Geiger counter, which, for example, when I came out, I put the Geiger counter over the leaves. It went off. And when I reached into the tree, closer to the branches, it didn't go off. It went off on the outer part of the leaves where it was affected.
And he even tested other trees around and got nothing.
Bob conducted his investigation just like a CSI. An important step is to collect control samples from the trees and the dirt in the surrounding area. These samples are then used by scientists to read what is normal in the environment. They're then compared to samples that are collected from ground zero of the event to determine if anything anomalous has occurred.
Like Bob said, he took samples from all around. But on this tree in particular, the leaves had like little phosphorescent burn marks on them. We have boron and magnesium on the leaves.
So would you say, in your opinion, after the analysis, that at least this, and maybe the 2 of them, they were anomalous in their readings?
Absolutely, because Denise said she saw it happen on this tree and that tree. And plus, it's not in the soil either. Normally what's in the soil is in the tree. Bob took soil samples, and the boron, the magnesium, it was not in the soil. So something had to land on this tree. We normally get about 8 UFO sightings a month. What happened in this case, we had 225 sightings in the second half of the year. We went from 8 to a high of 63 in July, and we were averaging 45 sightings a month. This area had half of all the UFO sightings last year.
Could it be that the craft that dispersed an unknown substance over Denise Murder's tree matches the same craft that was seen by other witnesses in the area, but on different occasions? Although we have yet to find any other witnesses to talk about sparkles coming down from the craft, we decided to pull together 3 of the key UFO eyewitnesses in the area. And we enlisted the help of sketch artist Detective Sergeant Ivan Mendez of the Trenton Police Department to help us draw a composite sketch of what these witnesses might have seen.
I would say it's like an aspirin shape. The sides were bubbled out. There was 3 glass bulbs on the bottom of the craft. And then it had small windows around the side of it. They were glowing. Beautiful colors, kind of like spinning around, looked like windows.
Do you mean you think that the light was coming from inside the craft?
That's what I was guessing by the look that I had.
And it was kind of shaped like this, like a hang glider is the way I would describe it. And it was flying this way, like that. Oh, that's good. That's excellent.
It's kind of like a ball, like a circular, but it was very like edgy, like it kind of had a lot of angles.
If you had to compare this to an object, what would you compare it to?
Probably more like a stop sign.
Stop sign.
But it had like plates on the side of it.
It had more angles than that.
So it was a sphere,
Yeah,
but multifaceted, a lot more sides on this thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Take a look at this and just see how close this is to what you saw.
I think that's pretty accurate on the way I saw it.
It's looking pretty real, like the way I saw it.
After meeting with the witnesses and after seeing Sergeant Mendez's sketches, we made a discovery that I believe validates Denise Murder's experience.
I mean, it's quite obvious based on the pictures. Everything's consistent with each other.
At first, it looked like it would be a plane, but I could tell at nighttime when I saw it that all these lights, they don't match up to what a plane would look like.
We've enlisted the help of police sketch artist Sergeant Ivan Mendez to see if eyewitnesses here in Pennsylvania are seeing the same or similar craft. The sketches are mind-boggling, and I feel that the sketches shown to us authenticate Denise Murder's sighting, and quite possibly the UFO trace evidence itself.
I mean, it's quite obvious based on the pictures. Everything has a aspirin-like circular shape. They definitely all have some similarity with respect to the lighting. Everything's consistent with each other.
But what's really interesting about this description is it looks so similar to Denise's description.
Exactly.
You've got lights around the edge primarily, and then lights on the bottom. Denise says there were 3 lights. It was Caitlin who says there are multiple lights at the bottom, but I don't know, maybe this is just recollection.
Would it be safe to conclude that these might actually be the same craft?
Oh, absolutely. Witnesses see things differently, especially during the course of excitement or the level of stress they are experiencing at the time. So being the fact that we actually put these together side by side, I mean, they have a lot of characteristics in common, so I will have to say yes.
According to Sergeant Mendez's professional opinion, all of our witnesses in Bucks County saw the same thing. The question in front of us now is, why are they here? Are they testing our trees? Are they testing our people as well? We have to find out what they're testing. We're going to meet with Nancy Talbot of BLT Research, who's investigated countless other trace evidence cases. She packaged the research on this whole Bucks County investigation.
Well, Nancy, we're investigating some of the best UFO trace cases that we can, and we're wondering, what are some of the best cases you've come up with?
Several years ago, I went to Poland. We discovered the Golubki rock case, which produced some magnificent evidence.
Nancy embarked on a research trip to Poland to investigate multiple trace evidence cases. She visited the small town of Golubki, where she investigated a UFO encounter that occurred on a small farm in a very rural area.
There's a young man there, his name is Miłosz, and he was 11 or 12 at the time this had happened. It was 1998, I believe. And they live in this tiny little town of Golubki. There are only maybe 5 or 6 farms in the village. And one night, his mother, Evelina Kuss, was awakened in the middle of the night by an orange-red glow coming through her windows. She got up, went to the windows, and then observed a disc-shaped, brilliant, fiery, orangey-red object very slowly coming down into this field. As she watched, this thing just slowly settled down into that field. And after a while, the glow died out. It wasn't very long before the whole family got up. Miłosz decided to go down to the spot in the field where she had seen this thing. He found a bunch of stones in a more or less elliptical arrangement down at the very end of that field that had never been there before.
Was the location of the sighting of the unidentified flying object, did that correlate to the location of the ring of stones that was found in the field?
According to Evelina, precisely.
It's an interesting connection that this mysterious ring of stones were found exactly where the UFO was witnessed. I'm eager to find out what these stones really are and why were they even placed there.
So he tried to pick them up, and they were too heavy. He was only 11 at the time. In the center, though, there was one smaller one, and that picture on the top is the one smaller one that he could lift. They were very dense.
Okay, so these rocks, they were actually sitting on top of the ground.
They were apparently deposited.
It is bizarre, but the evidence points to these stones just being dropped on a farm in Poland. Although there is no obvious way to explain this, Nancy told us of some other cases that occurred nearby the farm that may offer another explanation.
While I was there, I also investigated a number of very strange holes in a nearby village. A neighbor had witnessed one evening a brilliant triangle up over the trees, very close to the house. It hovered for a while over that field, and her grandson found this huge hole in the snow with no dirt on the snow at all.
And all the fill was taken out?
And there was none of it deposited on the snow. There were several other cases of that same sort of thing documented in the time period just before Evelina Kuss had her sighting.
We wonder, are these craft actually using soil to test and deposit elsewhere? Is it like Denise Murder's tree, where somehow some particles rain down on it and then were vacuumed up again by some beam? Wherever these craft come from, they're not just looking at us, they're testing our leaves and grass and ground, they're testing our soil, and they're testing us. Samples from Denise Murder's tree and pieces of the rock from Golubki, Poland, were sent to Frontier Labs in Chagrin Falls, Ohio. Phyllis Bunger, along with Nick Ryder, have analyzed these samples, and we hope they can provide us with some answers.
So what was the first analysis that you did with the samples that you got from MUFON?
I reviewed them with a fluorescent light to see if I could find any visible particles. Was there anything actually stuck to the leaves that looked unusual?
Was there?
I did find on the affected tree leaves a couple of specks that actually fluoresced green under a long-wave UV handheld lamp. So those piqued my interest, and took a look at them with a scanning electron microscope and energy dispersive spectroscopy.
A scanning electron microscope, or SEM, is a type of electron microscope that images a sample's surface by scanning it with a high-energy beam of electrons. The electrons then interact with the atoms that make up the sample, or in this case, the UFO trace evidence, which then provides the analyst with important information regarding the sample's composition and chemical makeup.
As you can see here in this photo, they look like eggshells. Now, of course, this whole flight that these were part of was only maybe the size of the head of a pin.
So, Nick, have you found this substance in any other cases?
There have been a number of cases off and on over the years in UFO residue of very small microscopic spherical particles. The leaves, at least, appeared to have roughly twice the boron content than the control leaves did.
Is it possible that, like, the landlord of the premises saw that this tree wasn't doing well and sprayed some pesticides on it?
It is certainly possible.
Boron is a key element in many pesticides, so it's entirely plausible that the reason for these increased levels of boron is due to the landlord or the gardener simply spraying an infested tree.
What is the evidence that we have here that is absolutely anomalous? It sounds to me like it might be these fluorescent particles.
Explanation was something natural.
And I says, oh my goodness, I recognize that. And I matched it up with a reference in my files, and I said, it's uric acid. I said, that's the primary component of bird urine.
So maybe the findings are a bit humorous. The analysis shows that Nick and Phyllis's work, it's been meticulous. And you can't blame them because all they found was bird pee and trace evidence, because quite frankly, all the real trace evidence, the evidence of the UFO, that could have been washed away long ago. That doesn't mean the end of this case. It only means that the trace evidence might have been there, but now it's gone. So in addition to this Bucks County case, both of you also analyzed the material from the Golubki case in Poland. What did you find in that case?
Well, we basically found that there was vitrified glass-like soil.
Looked like it was dirt in a glassy form.
Soil vitrification occurs when soil is heated to 1500 to 3000 degrees Fahrenheit. Although vitrification can occur naturally, let's say with a lightning strike, the unnatural process of soil vitrification is being used to clean up toxic waste sites. The process includes putting 4 electrodes into the infected area of the toxic spill. An electric current is then passed through the electrodes to create heat, thus melting the surrounding soil. The result? A glass-like rock that contains the harmful contaminants, making it safe for transportation. It's an expensive process and fairly new technology that is only now beginning to be utilized. Is it likely that this is the explanation for the soil vitrification in Golubki, Poland? Probably not.
So there was no evidence of someone performing this vitrification there?
No, that was my understanding.
Okay.
No.
So which leaves us with the possibility that it was either trucked in or that there is some connection with the UFO that was sighted the night before. One other explanation is that hoaxsters created this vitrified soil and placed it in the backyard of the Kuss family farm. Why? Who knows? But we have to entertain this possibility.
So they found vitrified soil the size of cinder blocks, and that's a pretty big size. What kind of equipment do you think it would take for a human being to make something like that?
You'd probably have to resort to a really large hydrogen torch, but all of those things require industrial-sized commitment. You could not make these in your barn.
Vitrification of soil is expensive, and it's difficult. However, it is possible. But is it with tools normally found on a farm? We've arranged a vitrification test to determine if using an arc welder and an oxyacetylene torch can produce enough heat to create vitrified soil.
We're in Levittown, Pennsylvania, meeting Cindy Fidjelkowski, owner of First Choice Welding, to see if we can fuse soil together using common welding equipment.
We have 2 different processes that can definitely surpass 3,000 degrees. The oxygen acetylene torch uses the 2 gases combined to produce temperatures around 6,000 degrees. The other process that we can use is called stick welding. What that uses is an electrical current that goes from the welding rod into the workpiece. Temperatures can go up to 10 to 12,000 degrees.
So speaking from the perspective of a rural farm in Poland, you'd need a real power supply, a real heavy-duty power supply for that second process you're talking about.
Yes.
Well, have you ever tried anything like this before?
No, I have not.
Do you think we'll have any success?
Give it a whirl.
Let's go.
We've come to First Choice Welding to meet with Cindy Vigilkowski. We've set up a vitrification test to determine if common tools found on a farm or an industrial environment can produce enough heat to create vitrified soil. We know that during a UFO sighting in Golubki, Poland, vitrified soil was either dropped or intentionally placed on a farm, but we don't know why. Entertaining the theory that this could be a hoax, we want to see what somebody would have to go through to create these chunks of vitrified soil. All right, I'm happy with the way the soil's set up.
I did look into the Socorro, New Mexico case, which involved Lonnie Zamora's sighting of a craft that landed in the desert and caused glassification or vitrification to occur in the desert. We actually visited a local artisan who used a type of oven for melting glass. He told me that it's actually very difficult to melt sand using welding equipment. So I'll be very interested to see if we can actually do that today.
So the first thing I'd like to do is start with the arc welder. We're first going to see if an arc welder can produce a vitrified piece of soil. The process is relatively simple. We laid a piece of metal on top of the dirt and welded it to the surrounding box that we built to contain the soil. This container is now grounded to the earth, allowing the current to flow and the weld to take place.
The hottest point on the metal is going to be the exact point where the welding rod meets the metal. And then as we weld, the heat's going to flow with the weld and it is going to disperse. However, it is going to lose about 50% of its heat processed.
Well, there seems to be some charring there. Well, is it possible that some vitrification occurred on like a granular level? Like really
Maybe very minute.
But certainly not on the scale that
No.
we're talking about in Poland.
No.
Huge cinder blocks of vitrified substance.
We attempted to vitrify soil using an arc welding process, and we had no success. And to tell you the truth, I didn't expect that we would. The heat dissipated into the environment, and it wasn't concentrated enough to vitrify the soil. So next we're going to attempt to vitrify the soil using an oxyacetylene torch, and I expect to have more success with this because we have a high temperature flame in direct contact with the soil. We're talking about a maximum of 6,000 degrees of heat, which is well beyond the limits of what is needed, and we're going to apply this heat for about a minute, maybe two. It looks like we're having some kind of reaction there, to tell you the truth, already. I'm not sure of the vitrification, but you can see the soil glowing. Right now, the flame from the oxyacetylene torch is melting and therefore fusing the different elements inside. I think it's obvious that this is working, but how much vitrified soil are we actually going to be able to create is the question.
So am I seeing the soil itself begin to glow now?
But look at how much work it's taken just to melt that little coin-sized bit of dirt, though.
All right, I think that's good enough for now.
Okay, so we have a little crater.
Well, it's obvious from the results of the oxyacetylene test that you can vitrify soil using high heat, using metalworking tools that are found on a farm. But it was just such a small amount, a very thin layer, and we would not be able to make anything comparable to the size of what was found in Poland.
What are the chances of some kid in Poland being able to do this with welding equipment?
Maybe if we took maybe about 15 of them, put them together and did it. Impossible on a farm.
This was really fascinating.
Well, I think it's interesting when you think about how much energy was generated just to create that little tiny chunk. I think it's safe to say that these giant vitrified chunks weren't created with normal farming equipment.
That's for sure.
Well, there's one thing that we really need to remember is that soil vitrification didn't happen at the same place where the UFO sighting was. Now, I'm not saying that a UFO didn't create it, but it didn't vitrify there.
Now, you know, Nancy was talking about these mysterious holes that she was investigating in Poland as well. Put two and two together, maybe these UFOs are analyzing our soil the same way we think the sparkles are analyzing Denise Murder's tree.
Well, think about it for a second. If there are extraterrestrials traveling halfway across the universe to the planet Earth, they have superior technology in so many ways. Do they really need to analyze a tree in Nancy's backyard and some soil in a farm in Poland?
Well, I mean, why not? I mean, what would you know about an advanced civilization, right? We don't know what they're up to.
You're both right in your own way. I think we could debate this the entire day, okay? Here's something that I think will really fascinate you. We're going to talk to Bob White. Bob White says that he saw a UFO, it saw him, it shot something to Earth. He picked it up and he says it's a piece of a UFO.
If this is the real thing, I want to see it.
When it went up into the sky, it was something I had never seen before, and I had the feeling it was not of this world.
Hi, good morning. Hi, Bob. How are you? Although we've looked at other UFO trace evidence cases, Bob's is different. He says he has an actual piece of a UFO that he discovered after an amazing encounter in 1985. Bob, could you tell us how you came into possession of this unique-looking object?
I was in Grand Junction, Colorado, between Grand Junction and Cisco, Utah, and it was late at night, and the lady friend and I were driving. We saw this light up ahead. This was a huge light. It was about the size of a 3-story building. But she turned the headlights on me, and when she did, this thing just shot up in the air like that, just as fast as my eyes could follow it. And it connected to 2 other lights, like 2 blue neon tubular lights, one on top of the other, with a space in between. And when it hit this, it just shot out of sight. But before it did, I saw kind of a little explosion like. This thing came back down toward me. There was a groove in the ground, and I followed the groove in the ground until I saw this thing lying there, and it was still glowing hot.
So after Bob sees this object, he heads out to where he thought the piece had landed, and he sees this groove in the ground, as if this piece came down at a high velocity and skidded to a stop. Now, this is the first time I've heard a story like this, and the fact that he not only found this piece, but has it to show, is amazing.
So, Dr. Gibbons, have you done any work yourself on this?
Yes, I have.
Dr. Robert Gibbons is a physicist who's formerly worked at NASA, Northrop Grumman, and Hughes Aircraft. He served in the U.S. Army for over 20 years, and his entire experience he's never encountered anything quite like the Bob White object. In the year 2000, he joined Bob White's team to determine once and for all what this object really is.
So we went to Laughlin, Nevada, and during that time, the object affected the batteries in the wall safe at the hotel 3 days in a row. The batteries had died and were broken open the first day. People from the hotel had to come up and put on an electronic meter to open the safe. The meter said the safe is open, yet it was not. So the first night they had to drill it. This happened 2 more nights in a row. There must be some effect coming from the object, some kind of radiation or something causing those batteries to go dead.
Whatever caused this safe to malfunction, it was obviously not an isolated incident. So to determine if it was some kind of X-ray or gamma ray, Dr. Gibbons set up a test utilizing dental X-ray film and the Bob White object.
I made a cylinder. We put a film, unexposed film at the top, unexposed film at the bottom, and then we had facing in on the cylinder films, and we came up with a really, really interesting conclusion. These are the actual dental x-ray films. The one of importance is the one with the 2 black spots.
Right. So you're saying you held the object up to
Actually,
x-ray?
Actually, this sat on the film for 48 hours, and during that time, something exposed the film, not just fogged it, but put 2 distinct spots which match up with the 2 lobes, if you will, of the object.
It looks like the object has 2 distinct lobes, as Dr. Gibbons calls them. And in this X-ray test, when you line up the film with the object, the 2 lobes match up almost perfectly with the exposure on the film. So something is emitting from the object that causes the film to expose. But what this is and the reason for this, it's still undetermined.
Well, what about scientists? What have they said about this?
The first thing I did was send it to New Mexico Tech, and Dr. and he said, had I known the story on this, I would have suggested that you do isotope ratio abundance tests on it, because he said, we don't have the equipment here to perform these tests.
An isotopic ratio abundance test measures the amount of isotopes in a given element. Different elements like chromium, titanium, and strontium have a range of isotopes in their composition. But formed in a different or even alien environment, these ratios could be different.
I had contacts to go to Los Alamos, and there I met who is the top metallurgist, and Dr. who they called in on special occasions, and he was really excited about this because he had never seen anything like it before. He said to me, this is something that I've been looking for all my life. He said, this is definitely extraterrestrial. Now we have a report from Los Alamos. They said they did the analysis on silicon. I called Dr. and I asked him about it. He said, aluminum, aluminum. And I'm saying, why does he keep talking about aluminum? The report says you did it on silicon. He said, well, we'll have to talk to So I called and said, isotopes? No, we didn't do any isotopes tests at all.
Although Los Alamos was supposed to do this isotopic ratio abundance test, they denied that they did.
So were you getting the feeling that all these scientists that were doing the analysis were lying to you?
Absolutely lying to me.
We have a piece that may have fallen off of a UFO. We know that it affected a wall safe and caused it to malfunction 3 nights in a row. And although there have been multiple labs and analysts that have looked at this object, Bob claims that they're scared to talk about it after their tests. But we've contacted 2 scientists who are brave enough to talk to us and analyze the Bob White object.
My initial impression of the object was that it was extremely extraordinary. It was something like which I'd never seen before.
Chris Ellis is a solid-state physicist with an expertise focusing on aluminum alloys and semiconductors.
After poring over the data, we found that the object is an aluminum alloy of unknown origin. This is not anything like we've seen before. There are some very unusual metals in this object that you typically do not find in other alloys.
What's the chance that these elements would end up in this alloy either naturally or accidentally?
I'd have to say pretty much 0.
So this is absolutely a manufactured object.
Looking at a detailed list of all the metals and all the elements that can be found in this object, it's conclusive that they're there by purpose.
This looks like a manufactured piece created by some form of intelligence. Now, could it be made by us, or could it have been made by an extraterrestrial?
We're looking at something much more advanced than what we're currently familiar with today.
We are in Kimberling City, Missouri, investigating the Bob White story. In 1985, after seeing multiple UFOs, an object is either ejected or shot down towards the ground. Through scrupulous scientific analysis, no one can say what this piece actually is. We are now sitting down with 2 scientists who were brave enough to come out and speak to us. And even though the institutions they're affiliated with requested to remain anonymous, we're uncovering new clues that are being discovered about Bob White's object.
I did two types of tests. The first test I did was X-ray diffraction analysis.
David Lamb is a research scientist currently at a major university in the U.S. His expertise is in physics and material science, and he spent the past year researching the Bob White object.
What's very unique about this is we have what's called an amorphous peak here. And that amorphous peak tells me that this is a polycrystalline semiconductor.
What's the significance of that? I mean, how anomalous is that?
You don't find that in aircraft aluminum.
Where do you find it?
I'm not aware you find it anywhere. Another thing that's very unusual in this is it has silver in it, and a very high percentage of silver, about 4.3% silver. Silver is only used in aluminum at the experimental stage of superconductivity. If you spray the surface of aluminum with silver, then you enhance superconductivity.
Superconductivity is a phenomenon in some metals that occurs at very low temperatures, resulting in absolutely zero electrical resistance and excludes the interior magnetic field. This means that an electric current introduced to the superconductor can flow and persist freely and indefinitely without any added power source.
Let's say you fire a bullet through a magnetic field, well, it's going to have experienced drag. But what if that bullet was able to superconduct? It would expel the magnetic field, and that bullet would not slow down. It would not experience any kind of drag. So, if this was something traveling through space and it was going through, let's say, Jupiter's powerful magnetic field, it could theoretically expel that magnetic field and zip past Jupiter without experiencing those forces.
Now, with superconductivity, is that difficult to achieve?
Space is the perfect environment for superconductivity. You have to expend no energy to get objects to be superconductive in space.
So if an object were fabricated to travel in space on its own, this would be the kind of object it would be.
Yes. You're going to get the biggest bang for your buck out of the native properties of this object in space.
It's a perfect fit.
Let's put the pieces together. Bob White's object reminds me of other cases we've investigated in the past. Maury Island, where a witness said metal objects were ejected from a UFO.
I took a little sample from the serrated edge of this aluminum piece. Most of the material you can identify. You know, it's the question of whether it's anomalous or whether it's normal.
Aurora, Texas, where Brawley Oates gave us an unknown aluminum alloy discovered at a mysterious crash site.
Right away we could tell this was aluminum. That's the highest peak. What's that one, that larger peak? Could we have picked up contaminants from the soil?
Even if we did, it should correspond to some element that we could match here.
That's interesting. Maybe we discovered a brand new element.
What do all these things have in common? These objects have unique qualities that might point to an extraterrestrial origin.
So we've had 3 trace evidence cases that we've looked at, and each time I get excited that we're going to come up with some kind of evidence that proves what we're dealing with is not of this earth. But every time, I'm disappointed.
I think the evidence is absolutely overwhelming, going all the way back to the 1930s, running right through for 70 years. There's a collection of trace evidence that is astounding. The problem is absolutely proving without a shadow of a doubt that that trace evidence is causally connected to the high strangeness that people experience. I think the wall between what we have now and where we want to be for absolute proof is tissue paper thin. We must keep going. The answer's on the other side of that wall.
We've investigated Bucks County and heard amazing testimony. And we corroborated the stories of eyewitnesses to an amazing craft. Although we had no idea what to think of these sparkles that Denise Murder described, I think we've shown with a preponderance of evidence what these UFOs are up to. After hearing the cases in Poland of this vitrified soil possibly connected to these unidentified holes, we think they might be testing us. But for what reason, we don't know. Then we hear the story of Bob White and actually hold the object in our hands. And we read the reports from top-level institutions that can identify it. It's fantastic. And as time passes, further scientific testing may one day prove that it's of extraterrestrial origin. I'm not alone in thinking that trace evidence may be the key to discovering what's behind these UFOs. It's just a matter of time before we discover that smoking gun that will blow this secret wide open.
Let's go.
We just received a phone call from David Lamb. After conducting additional scientific testing, he now theorizes that Bob White's object is a quasi-crystal of a very complex structure. This type of structure is considered to be the cutting edge of nanotechnology. It didn't exist in 1985, and even today, it's in its early stages of development. I believe as science and technology progress, it will one day be possible to properly identify the nature of Bob White's object and prove once and for all it's extraterrestrial.